What's up everyone, welcome to Workshop Rebuild. In today's video, I'll be sharing with you guys some tricks and tips on how to clean an engine block with some tools and solvents you have at home. The cleaning method I'll be sharing with you guys today applies for various parts that are located around the engine as well, so it's not just the engine block. But I chose the engine block because there are various surfaces that we have to watch out for and some other parts around the outside which we can just clean and scrub without paying a lot of attention. But before we clean the engine block, I'll share with you guys the tools and solvents I'll be using in today's video. Right in front of me, I have all the tools laid out that I'll be using for today and the solvents right in front of me here as well. So I'll go through the tools, and the first tool that I'll talk about is a double-sided scraper. I believe this is for bricklaying, but I've used this for so many different engines and machines and just for cleaning in general, and this has helped tremendously. So it's a flat scraper on one side, and then we have a pointy scraper on the other side. It's very handy. And next up would be just a flat scraper in general. This is a very thin scraper, as you guys can see. I use this a lot for removing gaskets that are stuck onto the engine block. So this is really handy, but I can also use it for some real serious dirt around the engines, and I can still get into the hard to reach places because it's a very narrow scraper. Next up is a flathead screwdriver. This is a very thin flathead screwdriver in case I really need to go into tight spaces. I have a bigger flathead screwdriver, so these tools are very common right here. And then we'll move on forward to some of the brushes. This right here is a steel brush. It has a smaller end and a bigger end. This is one of the brushes I use with the diesel fuel that I have over here, but I'll get into that later. Next up is a plastic bristle brush. It's the exact same thing, but this will not harm any aluminum or even any surface because it is plastic. So this is really nice where you don't want to damage anything. Next up is another plastic bristle brush, but it just doesn't have a finer side, and this is a little bit thinner so you can still reach in those hard to reach spots as well. Next up, I have a pair of rubber gloves right here. Just very simple rubber gloves. It doesn't matter what the color is, just grab yourself a pair of rubber gloves. My hands are pretty good against solvents, so it doesn't really do anything, but if I use diesel, I like to use rubber gloves. We can just move on to the solvents right away if I'm talking about diesel. This right here is used diesel. I would recommend using diesel fuel for most parts that are really oily, or even internal parts that you just want to clean off and get them clean very fast. Diesel is a great way to clean parts. So that's what I like diesel fuel for. There are many companies or places where you can get old diesel fuel. Even if it's for free, just go pick it up because it's very good for cleaning parts. The other solvent I use is just water and soap. So I just mix it in this container right here. And wherever I need this, where I don't want diesel to touch any metal, I use soapy water. And that's basically the two solvents that I use for cleaning my engine block or various other little parts that I just want cleaned. Yes, this is more or less labor intensive to use this right here or this method, but it gets the job done and it's super cheap, and most people have this at home. Over on my far right, I have just cleaning rags. So this is very standard. You can take this from some old clothing, or you guys can get, I don't know, 10 or 20 kilos of rag material at your local hardware shop. This is something that many people don't have, but I really recommend this. This is steel wool. I believe the grade is 400, or it's something similar to like a P400 of, I'm not sure of the grade, but it's a very fine steel wool right here. And I use this to clean the gasket surfaces once I scrape the gaskets off with the scraper. The steel wool does a great job to clean the surfaces after the gasket is scraped off. You may have noticed that there's always something little that's left over, or some residue or some old grease or something that you guys want to get off, but you're too afraid to go and scrape it off because you don't want to harm the surface or damage the surface. That's where the steel wool comes in handy, and I'll share with you guys that in the video here. So enough talk about the tools and the solvents. Let's dig right into the engine block, and I'll share with you guys the tricks and tips firsthand. Before I clean up the engine block, I'd really appreciate if you guys hit that like button down below. It helps this channel massively. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'm always trying to up my game with the video content and video quality. I just invested in a new camera, so you guys will have better video quality and you guys will see everything that I do in HD. So let's dig into the engine block now. Right here is the engine block of the Kohler 341 AQS. This is a 16 horsepower engine. I'll leave a link up above so you guys can watch the teardown video on this engine. I will be cleaning most of the surfaces around the engine. Internally, everything is very clean and I still have a bearing inside, so I don't want to get the inside of this block dirty. But what I'll be focusing on today is working my way from the top down, because that's the easiest way to clean something. If you guys start from the bottom and you work your way up, you're always going to be fighting the grime that's working its way down on the clean surface. I would recommend getting some kind of metal surface to clean your parts on, because then it'll be easier to clean up your mess afterwards. This right here happens to be an old baking pan. This works perfectly fine because when I use the diesel fuel or the soapy water, everything will be contained in this area and I can just take this and clean everything up. It's very simple. This is the top of the engine block and I'll be focusing on this straight away. You guys can see the old head gasket was sitting in this area here. The two valves are in this position over here and the cylinder is right here. I will be going ahead and cleaning this texture off where the old head gasket was sitting. After that, I'll focus around the valves. There's a little bit of buildup right here. And then I'll be cleaning the rest of the block around the perimeter of the cylinder. So let's dig into this right here. For this, I'm going to be using the flathead scraper and I'm going to just go around the perimeter and scrape it down very nicely. I want to make sure that the scraper is flush to the base metal or to the mating surface of the gasket. I don't want it to be on an angle because I don't want to make any grooves in this head surface or this block surface. There is a texture on this surface right here. It's very hard to see, but I'll give you guys a close-up on that. Next up, I'll be using the double-sided scraper. I will be using the small end of the scraper. Another option for this right here would be the flathead screwdriver, but I do prefer the scraper since it's a little bit thinner up front. I'm gonna go around the valve seat right here because I see there is buildup. I want to make sure that I'm not scraping the metal, that I'm just scraping the excess carbon buildup around the valve seat. That's very important. You don't want to be damaging any existing metal on the block. You want to be scraping off what shouldn't be there. So as I scrape around this, I see there's a machined surface for the seat and the valve seat itself is just a layer further down. I might use the other side. Right here I can see the valve seat is just a little bit lower and I'll give you guys a close-up on that right here once I'm done. So I got the surface scraped off the way I like it. Now I can move ahead and grab the steel wool. And what I will be doing is just grabbing a pinch of steel wool, tearing it off the bunch, something like this right here. And now I'm gonna do a circular motion and touch the mating surface all around the perimeter. And then I'm gonna work my way around the valve seats right here. Next up, I will be cleaning the sides of the engine block and I'll share with you guys what I use to clean all the gunk and grime off that. On this side of the engine block, we have some cooling ribs which we will have to clean out. I will be using a steel brush for this and possibly a plastic brush to even get in between the tight areas. I will be scraping off some residue, so I will be using a flathead screwdriver, and down here I will be using the larger scraper. So for that, I can use most of the tools that I have, and then the surface in general, I'll be using some soapy water. If there's something that's really baked on, I will be using diesel fuel around the exhaust manifold just to clean off all that baked material. So let's dig into this. So I finished the first two sides, and you guys can see it's very clean in this area right here. There's a little bit more cleanup to do in this intricate area here, but the cooling fins have also been cleaned, and that's very important for an air-cooled engine, that everything within the or between the cooling fins is very clean. Now I'm gonna go move ahead to the dirtier end, which is over here and up front on the engine where the valves were right here. So this was probably leaking, or this gasket was leaking, and that's why it's very oily in this area here. So I will be using or applying diesel fuel right here and down here to clean that up. After I'm done with that, I'll take the soapy water and clean everything off once more from top to bottom. But when I use the soapy water, I gotta be careful, because polished surfaces like the top over here can flash rust, so you want to have a wet rag and a dry rag ready. So I just shared with you guys how I clean the machine surfaces on an engine block and the general surfaces around the perimeter of the engine block with a scraper or with a wire brush. Now what I'll focus on is cleaning the complete engine block once more with a little bit of diesel fuel on a plastic bristle brush, and after that I'm going to be wiping it down with a moist rag or a damp rag, and that will contain water and soap. After that is cleaned, I have to go over all the wet surfaces and wipe it off with a dry towel, because I don't want any flash rust to pop up after the water has touched the surfaces. So let me share with you guys how I do that. You guys can see on the back side of the engine, it's fairly clean already, but what I want to do is loosen up all the grime that has worked its way into the casting. So what I'm going to do is grab the plastic bristle brush, dunk it in the diesel fuel, and just make sure I hit all the surfaces on the entire engine block. I will be just performing this method on the back end of the engine block right here to give you guys an idea of what it's going to look like. I will speed through the process on how I clean the whole engine block, but then I'll share with you guys the end result of this cleaning process. So what I will do is actually grab a rag and just wipe off all the excess diesel off first. And then I'll go ahead and apply my soapy water. The soapy water right here. And I'm going to just spray it on gently, like that. Now I'm going to wipe all the diesel off. After about 1 good hour, I successfully cleaned this engine block over here with the tools I shared with you guys before and the 2 solvents. Now I could go ahead and prep this engine for paint with some wax and grease remover, possibly sand down some flat surfaces, and then give it a primer and a paint coat. But for now, I'll give you guys one more close-up view on this engine block right here, and I'll share with you guys the finished results.